My sister forged my name on a power of attorney while I was in the hospital, drained my savings account, and vanished with her boyfriend to Mexico. I thought I had lost everything until my 72-year-old grandmother called me from her kitchen in Savannah and said, quietly, that she had already taken care of it. 4 days later, my sister called me screaming from a resort in Cabo San Lucas because her credit card had been declined in front of the entire hotel lobby, and the manager was already on the phone with the local authorities. Have you ever worked yourself to the bone for something and then turned around to find that the people you loved most had already picked it clean? Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I want to know who's part of this community. My name is Waverly. I'm 31 years old and I have spent the last 8 years building a small but profitable accounting firm in Nashville, Tennessee. I started out of a one-bedroom apartment with a secondhand desk and a laptop that overheated if I had more than 4 browser tabs open. I ate a lot of instant noodles. I took on clients nobody else wanted. The freelancers, the food truck owners, the single parents trying to figure out quarterly taxes for the first time. I built something real, one spreadsheet at a time. I also made one mistake that cost me almost everything. I trusted my sister. She is 4 years older than me, and her name is something I cannot bring myself to say with warmth anymore. I will just call her what she is, my sister. Growing up, she was the beautiful one, the social one, the one who got invited to every party and cried her way out of every consequence. I was the one with the calculator, the planner, the color-coded notebooks. Our mother used to say I was born with a briefcase in my hand. She meant it as a compliment. My sister heard it as an insult aimed at her. She called me cold. Uptight, no fun. She said I thought I was better than everyone because I had a business degree and she hadn't finished community college. She said this while borrowing money from me for the third time in a single year. Here is the thing about loving someone who resents you. You keep making exceptions because you keep hoping they will finally see you clearly. I made exceptions for 7 years. I paid her car insurance twice. I co-signed a lease when her credit was destroyed after she skipped out on an apartment in Chattanooga. I paid the deposit on that lease too. I gave her a job at my firm, a real one, with a salary and health insurance, even though my business partner thought it was a terrible idea. I told him she had changed. I believed it. 18 months ago, I had an emergency appendectomy. It came out of nowhere. I was at my desk reviewing a client's quarterly returns when the pain hit so hard I thought I was having a heart attack. By the time I got to Vanderbilt University Medical Center, my appendix had already ruptured. I was in surgery within the hour. I was under for 4.5 hours. I woke up in a recovery room not knowing what day it was. I'd been so focused on work in the weeks before the surgery that I'd gotten behind on some administrative paperwork for my firm. Nothing urgent, routine stuff mostly. But my sister had offered to help me organize it while I recovered, and because I was on pain medication and running a low fever and genuinely grateful to have someone nearby who seemed to care, I signed a stack of documents she put in front of me without reading each one carefully. I trusted her. She was my sister, sitting in that hospital room with a cup of coffee and a concerned expression. One of those documents was a limited power of attorney. I did not find out what she had done with it until 11 days later, when I was home recovering and I opened my banking app to transfer money to cover payroll. The balance in my business operating account was $4,200. It should have been $87,000. My personal savings account showed $300,000. My personal savings account showed $300,000. It should have been $46,000. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed in my pajamas, staring at my phone, thinking the app was glitching. I refreshed it 3 times. The numbers did not change. I called the bank. They confirmed that a series of wire transfers had been made over the previous 6 days, all authorized under the power of attorney I had signed in the hospital. The transfers went to an account I did not recognize. The total was just over $129,000, including a business line of credit she had drawn down to its limit using the same authorization. I sat there for a long time after I hung up. Then I called my sister. Her phone went straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I texted. Nothing. I texted my mother, who said she had not heard from her in a few days and was sure there was a reasonable explanation. I called my business partner. He picked up on the first ring, and I told him what had happened, and he was quiet for a moment and then said, very carefully, that he had seen my sister loading boxes into a car 4 days ago and assumed she had been working late. My mother called me back an hour later. Her voice was different. Careful. She said my sister had called her from the airport to say she was taking a short trip with her boyfriend and that I had said it was fine. She said my sister had sounded excited, happy. I asked my mother to say that again, slowly. My sister had told her I had approved the trip, that I had even given her a bonus for all the extra work she had been doing while I was recovering. I had given her nothing. I had barely been able to get off the couch to make myself toast. I hung up and I cried for approximately 10 minutes. Then I stopped because crying was not going to fix my payroll problem. My employees had done nothing wrong. My clients had done nothing wrong. I had a firm to protect. I called my grandmother. I know that might sound like an odd choice, but my grandmother, whose name is June and who lives in a yellow house in Savannah, Georgia, with 2 cats and a vegetable garden, spent 30 years as a legal secretary before she retired. She knows more about how the law actually works than most people who pass the bar exam. She is also the only person in my family who has never once asked me for money, has never made me feel guilty for succeeding, and has never, not once in my entire life, broken a promise she made to me. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which is one of her great skills. When I finished, she was quiet for about 4 seconds. Then she said, I need you to send me copies of everything: the power of attorney, the wire transfer records, your bank statements, and anything your sister touched at your firm. Send it tonight. Don't talk to your mother again until I tell you to, and don't try to contact your sister. Her voice was not alarmed. It was the voice of someone who had already started solving the problem. I did exactly what she said. What I did not know, and what she told me later in pieces, was that my grandmother had been watching my sister for a long time. She had seen the pattern. The borrowing, the resentment, the way my sister talked about my firm at family gatherings like it was a shared resource rather than something I had built alone. 2 months before my surgery, my grandmother had quietly contacted an attorney she had worked with for years, a woman named someone my grandmother trusted completely, and had begun the process of setting up a protective legal structure around my assets that I had not known about. She had not told me because she did not want me to feel like I was being watched or managed. She wanted to give my sister the chance to prove her wrong. My sister did not prove her wrong. What my grandmother and the attorney had established was a secondary verification requirement on any financial transaction over $10,000 tied to a specific flag in my accounts. The power of attorney my sister had used was legitimate on its face. I had signed it, technically, but the attorney had registered a conditional hold with the bank's fraud department that required a callback confirmation for large transfers. My sister had answered that callback by impersonating me. This was the piece that upgraded the situation from a civil matter to a federal one. The attorney also had something else: a digital forensics consultant who had been quietly logging access to my firm's financial software for the past 6 weeks. The consultant had documentation showing exactly when my sister had first started testing her access, what files she had opened, and which transfers she had staged in advance. There were 31 separate access events before I even went into the hospital. My sister had been planning this for at least a month before my appendix ruptured. She had not waited for an opportunity. She had been waiting for the right moment to use one she had already prepared. I drove to my grandmother's house in Savannah the day after I called her. I sat at her kitchen table and she made me eat something before she showed me the documents. She had them organized in a manila folder, color-coded with small sticky tabs. I almost laughed. I get my color-coded notebooks from somewhere. She laid it out clearly. The wire transfer fraud was already being investigated by the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit because the transfers had crossed state lines and involved bank fraud and wire fraud, both federal charges. The boyfriend my sister had left with had outstanding warrants in 2 states for prior fraud-related offenses, which had escalated law enforcement interest considerably. The power of attorney itself was being reviewed for elder financial exploitation statutes. which applied because my grandmother had flagged the manner in which I had signed it while medicated and post-surgery. The account the money had gone to had been frozen within 72 hours of my original report. My sister did not know any of this. As far as she knew, she had successfully transferred $129,000 into an account she could access, and she was currently sitting on a beach in Mexico celebrating her own cleverness. My grandmother looked at me across the kitchen table and said, "We wait. Let her spend a little. Let her feel like it worked. The moment she tries to move that money to a foreign account or make a large purchase, the tripwire goes off." I asked her how she knew my sister would try to move the money. She said, "Because she always takes more than she thinks she deserves, and she always does it fast before anyone notices. I've watched her do it her whole life. She just never did it to someone who was prepared." I went back to Nashville. I focused on stabilizing my firm. My business partner and I worked out a short-term bridge arrangement with one of our anchor clients who agreed to prepay a retainer in exchange for a discounted rate on the following quarter's services. It was not ideal, but it kept payroll covered. I did not tell my employees what had happened. I showed up every day. I answered emails. I reviewed returns. I kept the lights on. My mother called twice that week. I let her go to voicemail both times. On the ninth day after I got back from Savannah, my grandmother called me at 7 in the morning. I was already at my desk. She said, "It happened. My sister and her boyfriend had tried to book a villa, a private rental property in Los Cabos, for 6 weeks. The total cost was $34,000, charged to a luxury travel agency that processed international transactions. The moment the transaction went through, it triggered the fraud alert that had been sitting dormant on the frozen account. The travel agency flagged it as suspicious within 20 minutes because the billing address didn't match any known profile for the account. They held the charge and contacted their fraud department, who contacted the issuing bank, who contacted federal investigators. My grandmother said, "The wire just sent. Your attorney's on a call with the U.S. Attorney's office right now." I put my phone down on my desk and stared at the wall for a moment. Then it buzzed. A FaceTime request. From my sister. I stared at her name on the screen. I thought about not answering. Then I thought about the 11 days I had spent eating crackers and rice because I could not afford groceries while she was sitting on a beach, and I answered it. She was standing in what looked like a hotel lobby, all marble floors and ambient lighting. Her hair was done. She had a new bag. She looked tanned and irritated and utterly certain of herself. She said, "I don't know what you did, but you need to fix it right now. My card is not working, and this hotel is acting like I'm a criminal." I said nothing. She said my name. Sharp. Like she was correcting a mistake. I said, "I didn't do anything." She said, "Don't lie to me. You called the bank, didn't you? You froze the account. You're so petty. I did you a favor taking that job, and this is how you treat me? I helped you when you were sick." I said, "You forged my signature on a power of attorney and stole $129,000 from my business while I was recovering from emergency surgery." Silence. Then, "That is not what happened." I said, "There are federal investigators who have a very different timeline." She started to say something else, and then I heard another voice in the background. "Mail. Urgent." And then a third voice, firm and official, saying that they needed her to step to the side, please, and that this was not a request. My sister turned the camera slightly without meaning to, and I could see two people in what looked like law enforcement attire and a third person in a hotel uniform, and her boyfriend standing very still with the particular stillness of a person who already knows how this ends. She turned back to me. Her face had changed. She said, low and fast, "Waverly, you need to call someone. Right now, you need to fix this. This is family." I looked at her through the phone screen, at the marble lobby and the new bag and the tanned face and the absolute conviction, even now, that I would fold. I said, "You stopped being my family the day you sat in that hospital room and handed me documents to sign while I was on morphine. You knew exactly what you were doing." She started to cry. Not the genuine kind, the kind I had seen my whole life. The performance cry, the one she used when she needed something from someone. I said, "Good luck," and I hung up. She was detained by Mexican federal authorities and subsequently deported back to the United States, where federal agents were waiting at the arrival terminal with an arrest warrant. Her boyfriend was arrested separately, and the outstanding warrants in the two other states attached immediately. They were both charged with federal wire fraud and bank fraud. My sister faced additional charges under the false statement statute for impersonating me during the bank's verification callback. My mother called me from the courthouse parking lot on the day of my sister's arraignment. I let it go to voicemail. She left a 4-minute message about how I had destroyed our family and how my sister had made mistakes, but she was still my flesh and blood, and there were ways to handle things privately, and how our grandmother had always liked me better anyway, and how I had a responsibility. I listened to it once, then I deleted it. My grandmother came to Nashville for Thanksgiving that year. She sat at my table and we ate the meal I had cooked, and she told me about her garden, and I told her about a new client I had brought on, a small veterinary practice that had been doing their books by hand for 12 years. We did not talk about my sister or my mother or any of it. We just ate and talked, and it was the quietest, most ordinary holiday I can remember having as an adult, and it felt like something I had never known I was missing. My business recovered fully within 7 months. The frozen account was eventually liquidated through federal asset forfeiture proceedings, and a portion was returned to me as restitution. Not all of it, enough. My sister was convicted on 3 federal counts. She's currently serving time in a federal correctional facility in Kentucky. Her boyfriend pled guilty and received a longer sentence because of the prior warrants. My mother and I have not spoken in over a year. I don't know if that's permanent. Some days I think I might call her eventually. Most days I don't think about it at all. What I think about instead is my grandmother, driving the 400 miles from Savannah to Nashville in her 2009 Buick because she does not like to fly, showing up at my door with a Tupperware of homemade biscuits and a manila folder, ready to work. I think about the fact that she saw what was coming before I did, and she did not warn me in a way that would have made me defensive and dismissive. She just quietly built the net before I fell. There is a specific kind of love in that, the kind that does not announce itself, the kind that is already there when you need it before you even know to ask. I have stopped measuring family by blood. I measure it by who shows up and how and whether they are still standing there when the lobby goes quiet and the officials step forward and everything you were pretending was fine finally stops pretending. My grandmother is my family. The biscuits, for the record, were incredible. If you have ever had someone in your life who saw the trap before you walked into it, someone who was quietly in your corner even when you did not know you needed a corner, leave a red heart in the comments. Like and subscribe for more stories about the people who stay. I have thought a lot about what my sister actually believed was going to happen, not in a bitter way, not anymore, just honestly. I think she believed that I would panic, scramble, maybe cry to our mother and then eventually absorb the loss the way I had absorbed every other loss she had handed me over the years. She believed I would fold because I always had before. Every time I had paid her car insurance, every time I had covered her rent, every time I had written her a check and told myself it was the last one, I had taught her, slowly and consistently, that there were no real consequences for taking from me. That is not her lesson. That is mine. The hardest thing to sit with, in those first days after I found out what she had done, was not the money. It was the recognition that I had participated in this for years without knowing it. Generosity that never gets a boundary is not generosity, it is an open door. And people who are willing to walk through open doors will eventually run through them. My grandmother understood something I did not. She understood that love without structure is not actually protection. She loved me enough to quietly build a net before I fell, not because she assumed the worst about me, but because she had watched my sister long enough to know what was coming. She did not lecture me. She did not warn me in a way that would have made me defensive. She just did the work, in the background, without credit, without recognition, because that is what it looks like when someone is genuinely in your corner. What happened to my sister was not something I orchestrated. I did not set a trap. I reported a crime, I followed legal guidance, And my sister made every subsequent decision that led her to that hotel lobby in Cabo with federal investigators waiting and a credit card that no longer worked. She chose to forge my signature. She chose to impersonate me on a verification call. She chose to run. She chose to spend. Every single point of consequence in her story traces back to a choice she made, not a punishment I arranged. That is how accountability actually works when the system functions the way it is supposed to. I am not interested in her suffering. I am interested in what I learned from it. I learned that resilience is not the absence of collapse. I lost $129,000 while recovering from emergency surgery. My firm nearly went under. I ate crackers and rice for 2 weeks. Resilience was showing up anyway. Covering payroll anyway. Sitting at my desk and doing the work anyway, while my sister was ordering drinks on a beach with money that belonged to my employees' paychecks. You do not discover what you are made of in the good years. You discover it in the weeks when everything is on fire and you are still the only one with a hose. I also learned something about intelligence that took me longer to understand. Being smart in the technical sense, with numbers, with systems, with strategy, does not protect you from being emotionally naive. My sister was not smarter than me. She was just willing to do something I would never have thought to do because I was operating with a set of assumptions about family that she had long since discarded. Intelligence is not enough on its own. You have to be willing to see people clearly, even when seeing them clearly is painful. My grandmother saw clearly, and she acted on what she saw. That is the person I want to be.